Hello and welcome to this Washington Institute Policy Forum. I am Rob Satloff, the Siegel Executive Director of the Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome this global audience to this very timely and important event. There's a lot of diplomacy going on around the world, a lot of it going on around the Middle East. And in New York, there will be an especially important focus on Middle East issues when the world leaders gather for the United Nations General Assembly next week. A key item on the agenda will be something that has been percolating for some time. It will be the second gathering of a French Saudi initiative on advancing the idea of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. As part of this effort, we've seen in recent weeks a number of major countries announce their anticipation and readiness to recognize a Palestinian state. Now, in some quarters, of course, this is not new. According to the United Nations, 147 countries have already extended recognition to the state of Palestine. But the announcements in recent days have come from some of the world's most significant and influential countries: France, Canada, Australia, Britain, two of whom, of course, are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So this is not just another set of countries adding to this long list. This is a significant surge of major countries. This brings us to today's session. These announcements come, of course, in the context of important events that are happening on the ground in Gaza, where the Israel Defense Forces are involved in a major offensive around Gaza City. They come in the context of other diplomatic moves around the world, including the efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, as well as just following the events in Doha, when the Israeli military attempted to take out leaders of Hamas's external leadership and the blowback that followed that event. So there's a lot going on. This discussion focuses principally on the diplomacy surrounding a major state's decision to extend recognition to to a Palestinian state. And I'm really delighted that we have an all-star panel to take a look at the rationale, the implications, and the expectations for these moves. Let me introduce them briefly now. We have from Jerusalem, Tal Becker. Tal is one of Israel's leading legal and political experts on issues related to Arab-Israeli diplomacy. He served for many years under different Israeli governments as the legal advisor to Israel's foreign ministry. He is currently a vice president at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and I'm delighted that Tal can join us. Also in Jerusalem, I'm very happy to welcome Samer Sinijlawi. Samer is the president of the Jerusalem Development Fund, a longtime activist in the Fatah movement, and a powerful voice for engagement in peace diplomacy. I'm very delighted that you, Samer, are joining us today as well. Thank you very much. And then from Paris, I'm especially delighted to welcome Isabelle Lasserre. Isabelle is the diplomatic correspondent for Le Figaro, one of France's leading media journalist newspapers. And she's been closely following all aspects of French diplomacy. And I'm delighted to have her to provide insight from Europe, from Paris, about this initiative. So we'll have a multiplicity of views, multiplicity of opinions. I'm delighted that you could all join us through the wonders of modern technology for this very special event. Let me just say to our viewership, if you want yourself to get into today's conversation, I will welcome your input, your suggestions for questions to our panelists. There are two ways to contact me. If you are watching this on Zoom, you are welcome to use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar. By now, you all know what that means, to pose a question to me. If you're watching this on some other platform, please email me directly at rsatloff, RSATLOFF, at washingtoninstitute.org. I will get your email. I will read it while our speakers are talking, and I will do my best to bring your questions and comments into our conversation. With that, well, let's turn directly to our panelists. Tal, let me first turn to you. As someone who's been so deeply involved with peace diplomacy in many respects in many Israeli governments over the years, why is it that Israeli political leaders across much of the spectrum, not limited just to the current government, are opposed to the idea of other governments recognizing the state of Palestine, especially if they characterize this as a way to sustain hope in a negotiated solution and in a two-state resolution to this conflict?
Well, thank you, Rob, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel. In a way, the recognition issue reminds me of an episode of Seinfeld where Jerry Seinfeld wants to return a shirt to a store out of spite. And the owner of the store says, "We don't accept shirts out of spite." I'm a recovering lawyer, but to the best of my recollection, it's quite rare that recognition is an act that seems to be triggered not so much by an assessment that there's been a development in the independence of an aspiring state, but as a kind of rebuke or an act of expression of opposition to the policy of another state. And I think that's the beginning of the reaction comes from the context in which this is happening. But in a much deeper way, I think, the tragedy and trauma of October 7th has shaped not just the political spectrum's attitude towards Palestinian statehood, but I think a very broad swath of Israeli society. At the moment, at least, and if not even before that, the idea of a Palestinian state in the current context for many Israelis feels like the equivalent of creating the conditions for October 7th to happen again. And more than that, I would say even the idea of recognition at this moment, in other words, we're in the middle of a very, very painful and terrible war. Hostages are being held. There is so much suffering. But the idea that the response to all this is recognition of a state, to the Israeli ear tells a story that what has generated this conflict is not the annihilationist agenda of Iran and its proxies, but it's the absence of a Palestinian state. And that's a narrative I think that a lot of Israelis cannot get on board with. But beyond that, there's also the context in which this recognition is happening. And I think there are a couple of aspects to this. I'll mention three briefly. The first is it is very hard to avoid the feeling that this will be seen as a reward to Hamas. This is taking place in the context of hostages still being held and Hamas still being in power. And we see already Hamas leaders essentially celebrating recognition as their achievement. I've seen some comment by the recognizing states that Hamas is somehow objects to a Palestinian state and that therefore this isn't a victory for Hamas. I think that's wrong on two scores. I think first, Hamas is itself celebrating this. So I will take their word over analysis that they're not happy about it. And second, Hamas does not oppose, in my understanding, a Palestinian state. It opposes a Palestinian state that is tied to the end of the conflict and peace with Israel. And that's precisely what this recognition does not do. It does not link a recognition of a state to any kind of process of reconciliation. And I think it's hard to avoid a fundamental question of why countries like France and the UK and Canada, even if they were going to go in the direction of recognition, didn't link it to the release of hostages, to the removal of Hamas from power, to create some kind of framing that didn't allow Hamas to kind of declare October 7th as Palestinian Independence Day from the perspective of these countries. So that's, I think, point one. The second issue is the way this interacts with the Palestinian Authority. The New York Declaration, which is the decisions in New York, which will be adopted in the next coming days, make much of the promises that the Palestinian Authority has made about what it will do in the future in terms of having elections and governance and so on. And what we see from Israel's perspective is essentially front-loading recognition in return for promises of things that have been promised before but not delivered. And it's hard to see this as a serious gesture when the opposite, in other words, saying first take these measures and then there would be recognition, would create a very different kind of incentive structure. And it's strange to be connected to like the performative part of this, rather than asking if this is not a rebuke of Israel alone, and if it's not a domestic political issue, but it is genuinely concerned with advancing the prospect of Palestinian and Israeli reconciliation, why hasn't recognition been used in a way that disincentivizes Hamas and incentivizes the PA? And finally, I would say, Rob, that I think at its heart, even if I think a lot of Israelis would be opposed to recognition and are opposed to recognition, at least in the current context, it's one thing to do recognition in a form that is a rejection of from the river to the sea. And I would imagine if the recognition was framed as, we are doing this because we're legitimizing both a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, and we reject Hamas's agenda of from the river to the sea. We can in parallel be opposed to the annexationist agenda of some members of the Israeli government that are pushing that. And this is an act of a rejection of from the river to the sea, rather than a reward for Hamas or a punishment to Israel. But if that was going to be done in that way, I think the framing would be completely different. And the words around this and the nature of the act would be completely different. At the end of the day, and I think you yourself wrote this, Rob, in your piece on this, there is one constituency that matters in terms of actually helping a Palestinian entity or state emerge in the end, and that is the Israeli constituency. It is Israelis who need to be persuaded that a future Palestinian entity will not be a failed state or a terrorist state that will threaten them. And unfortunately, the way this act is taking place, this recognition act, essentially signals to Israelis that we are on our own in their demand, in that demand. The assertion, for example, that Hamas should no longer be in power, that we hear from those Western countries, is just that. It's an assertion. There's no way in which recognition is being used as a kind of lever to even advance that. And so I would say that in the end, what makes Israelis feel like this recognition act is counterproductive and very performative is that it doesn't seem to be connected with actually advancing in any concrete way the actual policies that would help diminish Hamas's power and encourage the PA to take the kinds of decisions it needs to take. And it's one of those cases of diplomacy, of being more about looking good and less about doing good.
More about looking good, less about doing good. Well, thank you very much, Tal, for your remarks. Let's turn to Samer in a different part of Jerusalem. You've been very active in trying to advance the concept of a negotiated solution to this conflict. When you hear and you read about these diplomatic initiatives by major countries, what's your reaction? Does it advance the goals you're trying to advance, or is it a detour for the goals you're trying to advance?
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be with you and with the other panelists. I think I want to come with the nice phrase that Tal ended, looking good and not doing good. I think the way these leaders, and I have been touring Europe, I have been very close to those who are calling the shots in the French capital. I was with President Macron when he met a number of Palestinian Israeli activists. I think what they are trying to do is to look good and not to do bad. Because this is more, it's a reaction to internal politics. They are not doing this in reaction to Hamas or in the reaction to the ongoing war. The streets in Europe are boiling. And most of these governments find themselves that they might need to copy what they are doing to Russia, to Israel. So instead of resorting to sanctions, they thought about showing some tough love that will not cost Israel anything, but will send some kind of a message internally to their boiling street, which is recognizing the state of Palestine. I agree this is political theater. It will not change the life of Palestinians and Israelis. And I agree totally with the phrase that Tal has mentioned. He said that the only constituency that can really help creating a Palestinian state is Israel. Correct. Me as a Palestinian, I might be happy to see more states recognizing the state of Palestine. And we can reach to 190 states recognizing the state of Palestine. If Israel is not one of them, it is meaningless. It will not change the difficulties that we both are facing on the ground. The only state that I need to convince to recognize the state of Palestine is the state of Israel. I need to focus on trying to convince 51% of the Israelis to vote in the coming election to an option, to a coalition that will take a path that might lead to a two-state solution in a reality. Without this, nothing will happen. I always say we are always one Israeli election away from peace. Always. If we are capable to convince the Israelis that there are partners on the other side, that the political development will not accumulate more security threat, but it will bring more security stability. If we can shift the thinking of the Israelis into this direction, if we can help Israelis and Palestinians to get rid of the hard feelings. Currently, what is blocking the possibility to advance any path towards political development is the hard feelings. Hard feelings, our hearts, both Israelis and Palestinians, are filled with a cocktail of hard feelings. Pain, anger, sometimes hatred. And these are the challenge that are facing us. And I would like also to say that we are confused. I know very well the Palestinians, I know very well the Israelis, because I talk to Israel from wall to wall. Left, center, right, Haredi, secular, academic, media, all levels of the Israeli society. And I am confident, because I know them very well, that they are confused, and the fear inside their hearts is preventing them from accepting the option of the two states. Most of the Israelis who oppose currently the option of the two states oppose it not out of ideology, but out of security concerns. And we need to accommodate these security concerns. So for me as a Palestinian, having 190 embassies all over the world is not enough. It will not help me. I prefer having 190 liaison offices in every and each Israeli neighborhood, talking and engaging to the Israeli directly. And trust me, Rob, I've learned something about the Israelis from 35 years of talking to them, and I told you I talk to all of them. And sometimes I joke with them and I tell them, listen, I know you better than you know yourselves, because I talk to all of you, you don't talk to each other. We can never pressure the Israelis. It's not going to happen. Pressuring the Israelis makes them more stubborn. The only way to move the hearts and minds of the Israelis is to try to persuade them. And Tal used this word, and I think it's a key word. We need to convince them. We need to touch their hearts and minds. It's we, the Palestinians, not the whole world. Continuing the current strategy of President Abbas, and again, he likes political theater. This is what he signs in every time. He likes to appear on the podium of the General Assembly once a year. I mean, this is the only time that we see him. He disappears the rest of the year, and he shows for 30 minutes there, and he say the classical speech, and then he disappears. His strategy is political theater. This will not help us. We need to be engaged with the Israelis. If I am able to convince 51% of the voters in October 26 to vote to a coalition that will open the doors for expanding the Abraham Accords and including the Palestinians in the package, changing the face of the Middle East, we will be able to see something different. Continuing this path of only political theater, the road to peace between Israelis and Palestinians does not go via New York or UN or Washington, D.C., or Berlin or Paris. The road to peace and political horizons between Israelis and Palestinians goes only via Ramallah, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Rishon LeZion, Nablus, Haifa, and every Israeli and Palestinian city and village. This is the only way we can end this strategy that we are living in. So what's happening is good for me as a Palestinian. I cannot say anything about it, but I can say it's not enough. And this is not the way. We need to create a parallel mechanism and process that engage Israelis and Palestinians. And this engagement should be conditioned by a change on one side at least. Maybe we, the Palestinian, should start this change. If we are changing, the Israelis will notice this and they will try also to respond by changing positively. The changes needs to start by a change of leadership. On the 5 pages letter that Abbas signed to President Macron and MBS on the 9th of June, 2025. And by the way, Tal, Macron said that it's a one package: ending the war, releasing the hostages, disarming Hamas, reform in the PA, Palestinian elections, and then recognition of the Palestinian state. He said it is a one package. And he insisted to have some kind of guarantee from President Abbas. These 5 pages that he has sent to both Macron, MBS, and Trump, where in paragraph 4 of page 4, he committed to organize a Palestinian presidential and legislative election within 1 year from the date of the letter, following a new party law that will prevent and will not allow Hamas to participate at all, and will lead in electing a Palestinian leadership that have an agency to start changing the dynamics of relation between Israelis and Palestinians. This paragraph for me is all what I read in these 5 pages that was sent from Abbas to Macron. So if this diplomatic tsunami on the podium of the United Nations on the 22nd did not allow me to have elections and essay to defeat Abbas in Ramallah and his corruption, and to defeat Hamas and the destruction that have brought to Gaza, and create a new leadership that will replace Hamas destruction and Abbas corruption by a third way of construction. This is meaningless. It's a waste of energy. It should be conditioned on convincing the Israeli, changing leadership on the Palestinian side, and changing the dynamics before the Israeli elections in 2026. If we do our elections and we defeat Hamas, the Israelis will be encouraged to think differently in this conflict and give a hope to peace.
All right. Thank you, Samer. Thank you. Very useful. Very interesting. I appreciate that. Isabelle, let's turn to you. You are, of course, a keen observer of French diplomacy, broader European diplomacy. These are serious countries with serious diplomats. What is motivating these capitals to pursue recognition of Palestinian statehood right now? What is the logical train that takes, in their view, from this declaration to an actual success in Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy? Or are there other factors at play that are motivating these decisions?
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Well, I'll speak about France because France is really the leading country of this so-called 10 countries that we'll see if they will really follow on the 22. And on the French side, there are several things which motivated this decision from Macron. I think the first one is that he's totally fed up with Netanyahu. There's a kind of exasperation from Macron. The second thing is that he has a kind of empathy, coming with the images of Gaza. Thirdly, he needs to do something. This is a Macron habit, Each time there's a problem, he likes to organize a big international conference and to act. He thinks that it's a place of the France, and especially since the dissolution of the parliament 1 year ago, he is totally lost. We are in the middle of a big economical crisis. We are in the middle of a big economical crisis, and the only thing where Macron can still be a strong president is the international sphere. He has only two big toys today. One is Russia, and the second is Middle East. So his team has offered him to renew this, classical position of the French diplomacy, recognizing the Palestinian state, because it's been years and years that each president, each MAE are talking about, but to link it with by being a way to lead to the solution two states. Macron is afraid of the street. Since the revolt of the yellow jacket several years ago, while I'm speaking to you, we have a big strike today in France, and some extreme left people are fighting, in the street again. So Macron has, the fear of Louis XVI to have his head cut, So he absolutely wants to do something on the international area, and it's also it's well done in a political meaning, because this recognition was one of the main projects of the opposition of Mélenchon. Mélenchon is the leading guy of the La France Insoumise, the extreme left party, which is very strong in France. So by doing that, Macron is putting aside one of its main opponents and one of its most verbal opponents. And he also put aside one guy who was the ex-minister of Foreign Affairs called Dominique de Villepin. I don't know if you remember him. He was the guy who, at the UN tribune in 2003, did this famous speech against the American war in Iraq. he was on the right, and now he has really moved on the left, and he wants to be president. And one of his projects is to recognize a Palestinian state. So, you know, this is why. When I said Macron is really annoyed with Netanyahu, this morning I had a breakfast with the French Foreign Affairs Minister, so I have very fresh information. And when I asked him, when did Macron took his decision for sure? He said he took it the 13th of June, after the first shot from Israel against Iran. What he said also, and this, I mean, for them, it's a very good move. The minister this morning said that he's absolutely sure that thanks to this initiative, France is back in the international game, is back at the UN, where France, you know, was absolutely not. I mean, its influence had decreased for some years. Here, what he said, this morning. It's a big diplomatic victory for France. France, once again, is leading and able to organize the big international subject on security. He also said that he thinks that the New York text is the most ambitious text for the Middle East since the Oslo agreement. Now, you know, what they say is, and they misunderstood a lot of things. For example, they are really thinking that the United States will follow them, because they say they are very proud of what they supposedly got, which is an agreement of the Arabic countries to work in the direction of a normalization with Israel. So now what they think is that this plan is the plan of Trump. It is the meaning of the Abraham Agreement. So when Trump and the Americans will realize that it's not only to punish Israel, but it's also a question of condemning Hamas, because the Declaration of New York wrote it, they will come with us. And together we will be able to work. I'm very doubtful of that. On the same thing, they really believe in this letter of Mahmoud Abbas. Then they think it's a big move, and that Abbas already started to reform the Palestinian Authority, and that the first reform was in the education, in the education manuals. So they really think it can work. What else? I think that they don't have understood that the war led by Hamas is not a normal war, and that each time 10 Palestinians are killed, the Hamas get one more point, and Israel is getting 1 point less. So they don't go into the subtlety of the special Hamas war. So what can I do also? I mean, at the end, you know, I think that Macron, it took 2 years for Macron to have a clear policy on Russia. You know, at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Macron tried to influence Putin. He was absolutely sure his influence could, stop Putin. It took him nearly 1 year and a half to realize that it was not working like that. So now the policy is very clear on Ukraine. It's not clear on the Middle East. They say it's, in the middle politics, as Macron is always doing. He says it's a policy of equilibrium, like the French policy in the Middle East should be. But the fact is, he doesn't know. At the beginning of just after the 7th of October, he's offering an international coalition against the Hamas. And 1 year after, he's asking France to stop to give arms to Israel, which, by the way, we don't give because it's so small. So he's just doing like that, and I don't think he understands where he goes. And also, last thing, when I ask them, aren't you afraid that this decision will be counterproductive because Israel and the United States are not in the game? So what we can expect is an escalation from Netanyahu, who will be absolutely furious and who will use your initiative to justify the annexation of the West Bank, and that it will be bad for the Palestinians also, and that the Hamas will think he has a reward for it. They don't see it.
Very interesting. Yep. Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for adding that whole dimension to understanding what's going
I'm sorry.
on. No. It's terrific. Again, to our viewers, if you want to get into the conversation, send me an email to rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org or use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar. So let me ask another round of questions before I turn to viewers. Tal, you just heard different panelists offer comments. On one hand, statehood recognition is the lesser of all the evils because it's really an alternative that Sommer suggested. It's really an alternative to doing really painful stuff against Israel. And actually, we saw hints of that with some statements by European leaders on trade sanctions and other matters, but that Israel should really be thankful that, this is the implication, that Israel should be thankful we're only doing this rather than doing something far more painful. We heard that, and then we heard, what Isabelle just said, and I hadn't heard this before, that the decision was taken the day or in reaction to Israel's attack on Iran. Of course, one thing has to do with the other is a fascinating question I hope we can get into. But when you hear these sorts of explanations of European strategy, what's your reaction?
Well, I mean, Isabelle mentioned that international conferences are a habit of Macron. I think she was being limited there. I think it's a very common preoccupation of France in general, the love of the international conference. And I think you heard both Sommer and myself, as people on the ground, we're less interested in what happens in New York and more interested about what happens in actually affecting the dynamics in the place that New York is trying to influence, right? And let's look at that. And that, I think, is the key here. At the bottom line, will this recognition help Hamas's narrative or not? It's clear that it empowers Hamas because it is not tied to the release of hostages, it's not tied to relinquishing power, and it enables that Hamas narrative. Does it really create the right set of incentives for the PA? Well, sequence is important. If recognition happens before the elections that Sommer wants, then, let's meet again in May next year and see if those elections are actually going to take place. And I wish the question being asked was not what is, maybe it's too ambitious if we're realistic, but not just what is good in terms of domestic politics and in terms of France looking good on the international stage, for example. Most of Isabelle's presentation was how this serves French interests, even though it is dressed up as meant to serve the Israeli-Palestinian dimension. And that, I think, is very upsetting. Rob, you mentioned that, well, shouldn't we be grateful that they're not doing something worse, right? So I have to say, from an Israeli perspective, I hope, with Western countries, share a set of interests. We would like to see Hamas no longer in power. We would like Israelis and Palestinians to be able to imagine a future that isn't involved with Hamas in terror. And when you look at the policy of a lot of Western countries, while they have said they want to see Hamas out of power, for example, that is also in the New York Declaration, what exactly are they doing to help that? What is the mechanism that removes Hamas from power other than Israel? Is it recognition of a Palestinian state, even though hostages are still being held? Is that the mechanism? Is it condemnation of Israel for the way it has responded to the terrorism of Hamas, but much less condemnation of Hamas itself and pressure on Hamas itself? So, I have this strange hope that policy can be not just about domestic considerations about what looks good, but actually us as to how to advance this. And I would say one last thing, Rob, about this that occurs to me, and that is, there might be one constituency in Israel that is not so troubled by recognition, and that is the constituency that wants to create the cover and argument within Israeli society to advance unilateral moves in Judea and Samaria, to advance an annexationist agenda, whether de jure or de facto. And there seems to me to be a strange kind of symbiotic relationship between those seeking to recognize a Palestinian state and those who are looking for the justification on the Israeli side to take far-reaching unilateral measures. They claim to object to one another, but in some ways they are empowered and legitimized by one another. And in that way, they are essentially, both of them, advancing interests which are in contradiction, in my view, to the interests of Israeli Jews and Palestinians. Both Jews and Palestinians have a right to self-determination. And what we would want the international community to be doing is to be incentivizing that version of self-determination that encourages respect for the other side, that rejects the vision of from the river to the sea, that looks at how to pressure Hamas so that Palestinians have a right, as Summer said, to live not under the terrorism of Hamas or under corrupt governance. And to use the tools, whether it's recognition or other, to do anything other than that, to use the tools so that you get to have a conference so that you can say you're leading the world when the impact on the ground is counterproductive, to say the least. In my mind, even for an Israeli, that's too cynical. And that's saying a lot.
Tal, since you opened the door, let me just take a quick moment to pursue this. Just one more on this. Do you expect the government of Israel to respond to this with a decision on partial or limited or even broad annexation in the West Bank, or do you think it has been warned against this route by the red light from the UAE and uncertainty about Washington?
I think it's too early to tell. There have been very important messages from the UAE, I think, and from the Saudis and others. And I think there are concerns about deterioration on the ground. At the same time, there are obviously different views within the Israeli government about what's necessary. There is a kind of narrative that if countries are going to try to impose a reality that risks endangering Israeli security, then Israel has to respond in some way. And so I think the dust has not yet settled. I hope that we will do things in our long-term interests and not get into the game of kind of retaliation without thinking about the consequences of that retaliation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Summer, can we focus for a moment on more on this, the Abbas promises, the Abbas commitments that you referred to in your early remarks? Of course, President Abbas, this is not the first time that he's promised elections. This is the greatest benefit he's getting from a promise of elections, but it's not the first time. It's also not the first time that a promised election didn't happen. Do you think that the pressure to fulfill this will be so great that he has to follow through this time? What is your analysis of the domestic Palestinian scene and the likelihood that this time there actually will be an election?
Well, I want to pick up on this from a short statement that Isabelle said. She said that the PA started reform and that it is going in the right direction. I would like Isabelle to investigate 3 names, please. And I link them to some incidents. In July, 2 months ago, Ammar Dheri, who was the chief of staff of the head of the Palestinian military intelligence, they replaced the head of that particular security institutions. And then when the new head of the military intelligence was in office, he took the chief of staff to interrogation, and the guy lost his life during interrogation. That was in July. In August, Muhammad Sharhan, 27-year-old political activist from Hebrew, a very simple guy that simply criticizes and says his opinion on his Facebook, was arrested by the Palestinian intelligence, preventive intelligence, and he lost his life during interrogation. That was in August. In September, Samir Hlele, a businessman, that dared to mention that the Americans are talking to him on the possibility of him running Gaza. He was arrested 10 days ago from a coffee shop in Ramallah. I'm not sure if he will go out alive. Where is reform, Isabelle, for God's sake? The whole world is looking about some cosmetics that Abbas is bluffing the whole international community with. He's trying to change the color of the car. We need to change the engine, Isabelle. We have a problem in the engine. This car is not moving. For 30 years, it's not moving. Abbas has been doing business with 8 different prime ministers of Israel out of 14 in the history of Israel. So 60% of Israel's prime ministers have tried to do business with Abbas. He did not succeed with any one of them. And everybody is trying to convince us, let's give him some more time. He has done business with 6 different Israeli presidents, 3 kings in Saudi Arabia, 4 French presidents, 2 kings in Jordan. He couldn't succeed with any one of them. And each day, we Palestinians, we are waking up and discovering that today is going to be worse of yesterday. And still, everybody is trying to tell us, maybe it's not time now for election, maybe it's too risky, maybe Hamas will won the election. It's not time now. We have a catastrophe in Gaza. There is a catastrophe in the West Bank, annexation, de facto annexation, the economic situation. For God's sake, who's responsible on all these catastrophes? If the Palestinian president is not responsible directly on the destiny of the current destiny of the Palestinians, then who is responsible? It's always we Palestinians, and the international community is looking about. It is looking outside to find somebody to blame on what's happening to the Palestinians. I think it's time to look inside. A Palestinian leadership should assume responsibility. The 2 regimes, Hamas, if Hamas, after whipping Gaza from the surface of the map, will not be punished by the Palestinians by exiting them forever from our politics, then how can we be accountable on our decisions? Any leadership. If the current economic situation and the freeze on the diplomatic level in the West Bank is not directly the responsibility of Abbas and should not ask us putting him accountable and exiting him from our political life, then how can we put any Palestinian leadership into a question of accountability? The key, the cornerstone for any political development starts by changing by Palestinian election. It should be happen. And I tell you something. The French, before they have included this paragraph, they made sure that it is doable. The Palestinian Central Election Committee says that they are capable in public. They say they are capable to organize elections under the current situation in Gaza. And even if Israel does not allow Jerusalemite Palestinians to participate, they have solution for this. There was a vaccination campaign in Gaza that included 500,000 kids. It means we are able to organize a process that needs a very accurate identification of the people who are receiving the service. We are capable to do this election. The only way to defeat Hamas is through election boxes. If we go and defeat them, a continuation of the current way, the current war that Bibi continues in Gaza will not lead to the defeat of Hamas, will lead to a continuous chaos. Currently, Gaza is under chaos. It is a Somalia, and and nobody will be able to fill the vacuum and control things and declare Hamas defeated, except a legitimate Palestinian leadership that will enter Gaza and maybe, after defeating Hamas in election boxes, will produce a Palestinian Ben Gurion that will activate the Al-Talena option. This is the way to defeat Hamas. Everything else is illusion. And I think Palestinians deserve to go to election boxes. I'll tell you something. Let us elect Hamas again. Just give me 1 minute, please, Rob. Let us elect Hamas again. What is the nightmare? That the Palestinian elections will result again for electing Hamas? Fine. At least we will pay the consequences out of choice. Now, for God's sake, we are paying the consequences of Hamas leadership and Abbas leadership in our flesh and blood with no choice, without having a say on this. That's why election should be done. There is no other way to do it. Reform cannot come from unpopular leadership. Sometimes this leadership says, when they meet American delegation, congressional delegation, and other delegations, guys, we are unpopular, we know it. But we are doing unpopular decisions and it needs unpopular leadership like us. This is bullshit. Unpopular decisions need popular leaders that make these unpopular decisions popular, because you can change the books, the textbooks, but you will never control the discussion in the classroom if you cannot rebirth the whole Palestinian people to believe that there is a new way of thinking and a new dynamics between us and the Israelis. That the only way for us to succeed is to defeat the fear of the Israelis and not to defeat the Israelis. That the only way to advance ourselves with the Israelis is to touch their hearts and minds and not to pressure them. And this needs popular leadership that comes by election.
All right. Thank you, Samer. I appreciate your passion for this. Isabelle, let me ask you, I have a couple of questions for you. First, you described the domestic aspect to this statehood recognition issue in France. Especially, you mentioned how this takes away an arrow in the quiver of the left, for example, what Mélenchon was trying to do. So what, in your view, is the likely implication in that will this decision quiet the left, or will it feed a desire to do more and more from that part of French politics? Is this going to end the issue domestically, or is it going to turn the heat up domestically on the need to do more and more on the Palestinian-Israeli issue?
It's going, Samer, just, when I was speaking about the reform on the textbook from Mahmoud Abbas, it was not me who spoke. It was, at the foreign affair minister, it was not myself. Huh? So it's clear, okay. I think it will not calm down, by any case, the left wing. First, because Macron is very unpopular in France. He has something like 50% of good opinionship in the polls, and a growing percentage of the population wants him to go, and all the left parties are asking for his demission. So it's not going to appease them. And second, because we have a real problem of anti-Semitism in France. Well, it's all over Europe, but France is really, it's really amazing. And this anti-Semitism is really led in the universities, but it's also led in the leftist political parties. Not later than 3 days ago, the chief of the Socialist Party asked that all the people in France put a Palestinian flag on the houses on the day of the 22 of September, the day of the recognition. So it's again, Macron is really trying to move in the direction of the majority of the leftist people of France, but it will do nothing. Everybody wants him to go, and I don't see any positive consequences in France.
Interesting. One other question for you that I received, Isabelle. There was a news report out of London today that the British evidently want to steal a march, as it were, want to get a step ahead of the French, and are going to declare their recognition of Palestinian statehood this weekend, before the French get to do it in New York. Could you say a word about this British-French competition on this issue?
Anyway, I mean, they won't be able to do it because Macron has already did it in July. So basically the British are going, I didn't know that, but probably the British are going to do this weekend what Macron did in July. It was a fight from the French side to bring the Brits on board. And I mean, I think the British reaction at the beginning in July, when Macron, said we will do it for sure, the British reaction was quite good. They said, why not? But first, the conditions: liberation of the hostages, demilitarization of Gaza, no Hamas anymore in Gaza for the future, and a total reform of the PA. So, okay. And then Macron worked with the Brits for all the weeks. I mean, they have done a work, I mean, during all the summer. The Minister of Foreign Affairs went in all the countries of Europe, and he spoke to, you know, the Brits all the time to convince them to follow France. It was a huge work of influence. And when the Brits said, okay, we'll go with you, they said, oh, yes, we won. So for France, they knew they couldn't have Germany. So their biggest, how do you say? I mean, the country, the most important for them was to catch Britain. So they were really, really happy.
Okay, interesting. All right, I have a number of questions I'm going to try to ask our panelists that people have sent in. Tal, a question for you, which is really asking you to put on your Israeli political analyst hat, if you will, which is even if one assumes all of the implications that you've cited and how Israelis are viewing this initiative from abroad, one still has to see that some of Israel's traditional friends are taking stands against Israel, that Israel is losing friends around the world. Is this beginning to seep into Israeli politics in any way? Is it advantaging the hard right? Is it strengthening the opposition to Netanyahu? How do you see this general trend playing in Israeli politics?
Well, I think there's a broad acknowledgement that's hard to deny that Israel's position in the world and legitimacy have been deeply affected by this, by the war and the tragedy of the reactions to that. So you'll have opposition to the government argue that, you know, Israel's public diplomacy has been effectively non-existent. Make arguments about a set of policy decisions and the way the war has been conducted. There are others who feel that really the war and our existential challenge is our top priority. And if we have to pay a legitimacy cost, it's almost an inevitable cost that we're going to pay, but we can't avoid it. There are others, frankly, who get into the mode of being very critical of the way in which this is playing in the West and the degree to which domestic politics is shaping the positions of governments who are our friends. And I think, in my view, Israel could have framed what it was doing in this war a lot better. But I also have, and I think there are real questions to ask on the Israeli side and a real need for a reckoning, both with respect to policy decisions of different kinds and with respect to the way we engaged and explained those policies, you know, dealing with the unbelievably painful moral dilemmas that Hamas put before us in this war. At the same time, I think there is a kind of reckoning and accounting that needs to be done by the West. It was so striking to me the amount of time Isabelle needed to devote to explaining the rationale behind this. And it seemed to me that 80% of it was about French domestic politics and domestic considerations. And that gap, I think, is very striking. And I'll mention one other example, which I think from the Israeli perspective is very striking. You know, you had, I think, the French and the Canadians essentially explaining recognition and justifying it in response to promises by Abbas. In the UK case, the framing is a little different. It looks, if I can say that, like that saying, like a camel is a horse designed by committee. It's quite difficult to understand, but fundamentally it says that there will be recognition of Palestine unless Israel does a set of things, including agree to a ceasefire. Beyond the fact, again, I can't help my lawyer genes coming in, no conversation about whether the entity, the Palestinian entity, actually meets the criteria of statehood. One might have thought that that was a relevant consideration. That's not mentioned. But instead, the relevant consideration is whether Israel agrees to a ceasefire, which, if I'm in Hamas, tells me I better not agree to a ceasefire, because if I do, then I will be denying recognition on the back of my October 7th action. And if not in intention, I'm sorry, then at least in effect, doesn't that make
Oop, I think we just lost you, Tal. Right at a key
the
moment.
UK actually, sorry, can you hear
All
me?
right, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, go ahead,
Can you
please.
hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, finish the
So if
thought.
that's the case, doesn't it make the recognizing states essentially, in practice, actors who are incentivizing Hamas to continue the war that they want to end? And I find it very hard to understand. And so the result of that is we all have moral reckoning to do here. Israel certainly, but I fear we're not alone.
Actually, if you want to look at the specifics of the rationales offered by the various countries, it is a fascinating exercise. I did this a few weeks ago. Like the French suggest that this is a way to save the two-state solution. If you listen to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, he is authorizing recognition because, in his view, diplomacy is dead and it has no chance, and therefore this is an alternative to failed diplomacy. If you're trying to look for coherence among the countries that are taking this decision, you'll be looking for a long time. Samer, a question for you that I've received. Actually, several people asked various aspects of this question, which is we are excited to hear your enthusiasm for Palestinian elections. Are you ready? Are there parties? Is there a platform? Is there an organization that is ready to compete against the incumbents, that is ready to take the ballots to the different towns and villages, different Palestinian towns and villages? Is there preparation on the ground for the day when Palestinian elections finally are held?
In 2021, there was an attempt to have Palestinian elections where Abbas canceled it only 2 weeks before its date. In that election, in that particular election, 36 different Palestinian lists registered successfully to compete in that elections. Most of them are street activists, local activists, young activists, motivated to do a change, brilliant, smart Palestinian, energetic. This is something that might not look good for some of the international players, because who wants energetic and dynamic Palestinian leadership? For them, for certain international players, maybe also part of Israel, they prefer somebody like Abbas, who is on the silent mood. He keeps everybody in the comfort zone. He does not challenge the status quo. And this is very, very bad. Because if we go back to the 6th of October, where most of us, including the Israelis, thought that there was a cat in Gaza. We slept over on the 6th of October thinking there was a cat in Gaza. We woke up on the 7th of October discovering that there was a dinosaur in Gaza. There is a lot of information about what could be happening in the West Bank. There was a lot of information about the 7th of October before the 7th of October. What all of us lacked is the imagination that it could happen. I'll tell you something, Rob. What could prevent a mini 10 mini 7th of October every day in the West Bank. What is separating Psagot from the Palestinian city of Al-Bir or Bet El from the Palestinian city of Ramallah? It is a simple fence of 1.5 meters. Technically, if Hamas wants to do many penetration, mini 7 October every day in different locations in the West Bank, they are capable to do it. Why don't they do it? Because they don't want to do it. It's time to fix the whole thing. It's time to bring Palestinian leadership that will end the confusion among Palestinians, that do changes that will help us organize ourselves in a better way. And I think the decision number one in a process of change that the Palestinians should produce through a change of leadership, it is something that is related to our narrative. The Palestinian narrative should change. And allow me to speak about changes only on the Palestinian side because I learned something. It is very important for any Palestinian not to lecture Israelis. We need to deal with our own homework and leave the others do their own homework. We need to change our narrative. It's time for Palestinians to recognize the historical links and rights of Jews in this land, the whole land, because it's a piece of fact. Reminding the Israelis that they have never been alone. They have a history of 3,500 years in this land. They have never been alone. There was always others, and these others are us. So now it's not a question who belongs and who does not belong. The question will be, how do we both belong? When we start thinking in this way as Palestinians, when we recognize deeply that in any Palestinian strategy, we should put the Israeli security in its bases, not to do them a favor, but out of Palestinian national interest. And everybody signs to it. And everybody starts working into these directions. And when the Israelis started noticing this change, they will too start reacting positively and changing towards the Palestinians. It does not stop on changing the narrative. There are a lot of things that we need to change. So that's why I totally, I'll tell you something, Rob.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you because we're running out of time, Samer.
Just a small story. I was meeting Abbas. By the way, in 100 years, the Palestinians have only 3 leaders: Sheikh Amin Hussein, Arafat, and Abbas. Abbas is leading us since 1965. He was number 2 in PLO. I was meeting him in the 90s as head of the Fatah Youth, his party. Each time we meet him, the young leaders of Fatah, he ended the meeting by telling us, "You are the leaders of tomorrow." 35 later, this tomorrow never came. We need elections because there are young, smart Palestinians that are waiting to be part of politics, and we deserve it.
All right. Thank you very much, Samer. So, Isabelle, one last question for you, which actually plays on something Samer said earlier today. When you look at the direction of French foreign policy on this issue, after this episode, after Palestinian statehood, do you see the likelihood that France supports much more punitive measures against Israel? That France does go down the path that Samer was suggesting is a possibility, that there is a path toward much more difficult punitive penalties that France would support against Israel?
No, I mean, I haven't heard of anything of that. I think the punitive measures will come from Israel much more than France. And that if Israel is disconnecting the security and intelligence relation, France will be the big loser. But I don't have the impression that in Paris they think that the thing is very important. In a way, they think it's just disagreement, but that, you know, it will come back very soon. They don't see the reaction of Israel against France like so important reactions. I think it will calm down. And well, I'm not sure. Maybe Tal knows more about that. But I don't see any, you know, provision of sanctions like that. It will be on the European side, and I think that the plan of France will be to hide behind the EU, because now that they are taking this step, I think their first move after will be to prove that they are also, you know, connected to Israel, and that their politics is really a politics of equilibrium. So they'll try to be softer on Israel. This is for, I think, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank all three of you. This has been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure that our viewers got a glimpse into three different dynamics: the internal Israeli dynamic, the internal Palestinian dynamic, and the internal French and European dynamic. All pieces of this larger puzzle. I want to thank all of you, Tal Becker, Sinijlawi, and Isabelle Lasserre. Thank you very much for joining us today here at the Washington Institute for this special policy forum. I wish you all a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.